Hi there, I'm Tom, and welcome to the Life, the Universe and Games podcast, where we pick a very particular topic to talk about, to stick strictly to, if you will, and then we get distracted and talk about something much more interesting.
Well, maybe not so much this time. I mean, we've got a topic we talk about quite a bit, so
Yeah.
we might stick a bit more on topic this time.
And as you can tell, we have Alex here once again, my go-to bouncing board whenever I need a good argument. And usually, well, in the past two episodes anyway, I'm not going to say usually because we don't know what the future holds, but in the past two episodes we picked a topic which we both knew a fair bit about, and one which we didn't really hold that much polarised views on. Today is going to be different. Today is a issue which has kind of split us directly down the middle, and we have different viewpoints on it.
Well, not the only topic that we do that with, of course, but...
Yeah, this is probably one of the most contentious between us, and so we thought we would talk about it on the podcast, so we have something to refer back to, I guess, and we thought it would be a very interesting topic to talk about. And since we're approaching a minute and a half in, I should probably announce the title of this podcast. We are talking about autonomous driving, or self-driving cars. Mainly we're going to be sticking to Google cars, because Google is a very public company and they like to show off.
Yeah, they're the sort of the name in the headlights at the moment, so to speak.
Yeah.
Excuse the pun.
Also, companies doing things with autonomous driving is Delphi Automotive, which has just recently attempted to drive all the way across America. A big road trip from Los Angeles to New York, I believe. There is also Mercedes and Nissan. I don't know too much about those two. And there is Tesla Motors, who arguably probably have the biggest hope of battling against Google, because they are insane and they do stuff like, okay, we're going to send people to Mars to live. So, Google and Tesla are probably the biggest ones, and most of the companies are saying they're going to be getting something out onto the public roads by 2020, in just 5 years' time.
Well, they've got things on the road sort of in testing at the moment already, don't they? So
yeah, but they want it in public hands, available to buy at your local shop or whatever, or get fitted by a specialist garage. They want it actually publicly commercially available by 2020, which is going to be a big effort. So here's where I stand on the whole self-driving car things, and then I'll let Alex talk for once, and he'll be able to tell you his point of view.
I usually just leave you do the introduction. I'll join in later on.
Yeah. Okay, so I think that self-driving cars are a humongous advantage, because 93% of all road deaths are human error, is a statistic I found out recently, and I think I read that 30% of all road deaths in America, all the ones that are caused by human error, were caused by drunk driving. If we excuse me, if we can remove humans from the equation, we remove human error from the equation by quite a large margin. There will still be issues with software, there will still be issues with hardware, but much lower rates of those issues compared to what human error is at the moment. There is something like 1.2 million road deaths a year worldwide, which is an enormous number.
Yeah, they say that driving is one of the most dangerous things to do. It's like that you can actually do. It's more dangerous than things like skydiving and things like that, and things that people would be obviously scared of.
You're more likely to die from being hit by a car than you are from being on an aeroplane, is one fact that regularly gets thrown away, or thrown around, because the airline industry is so very safe. And in fact, a lot of the...
Perhaps they're a bad time to do it, considering recent headlines, but...
Well, that's the thing. because it's so rare,
it hits the headlines.
it hits the headlines and it stays there for weeks and weeks and weeks with no real information.
Whereas anyone listening to this, pick up your local newspaper, a small-time local newspaper, and flip through the pages, and sadly, you will probably find a story in there about someone getting hit by a car, and it obviously doesn't make national news and stuff because it's so commonplace.
Yeah, and it's especially something we hear about a lot here in Cornwall because we don't have the best road system. We have very small country lanes a lot of the time, very tight bends, which people take far too quickly, and single lane roads most of the time in the country areas. And that basically leads to a lot of deaths, especially motorcyclists, when people come out of a junction too fast or don't quite see properly or anything like that. So it's something which I have kind of been aware of my whole life. And then there's the side benefits of self-driving cars, such as people who are too young to take a test, people who aren't confident enough to take a test, people who maybe they're losing their eyesight or they've gone completely blind or they've got another form of handicap which prevents them from driving. All of those people instantly gain a huge amount of mobility. And even in a much more general situation, if you want to go to a bar that's outside of walking distance, you can get your car to drive you there, it will drop you off, it will go park, and you can have a few drinks, your car will come back, pick you up, and take you home. This is, of course, once they become fully autonomous and all sorts of things like that. So that's my point of view on it. That's what I think the major advantages are.
Whereas, of course, on my side is the opposite. I agree that in a lot of situations, extreme situations specifically, there are advantages. Things like, as you say, people going down the pubs and things, people who perhaps can't transport themselves. But I'm very much under the situation of it's the control issue, in that you are, as you say, there is the reliance upon this technology, and the lack of doing things for yourself, so to speak. Well, I would much prefer a sort of almost like a glorified sat-nav where you have this mode that you can switch to of autonomous, but almost like not necessarily sat-nav, more like cruise control, where cruise control controls the speed of the vehicle, sets it to a much more thing. To be honest, I see this coming in its infancy, this being the first step towards it, because they're already looking at these speed regulating cruise controls, whereas instead of setting it up and it keeping speed constant, it will have detections on to know the current speed limits and things. So you'll be able to set up the cruise control, and it will drive, and then if you go from say a 40 zone to a 30 zone, it will slow down for you.
Yeah, that's been kind of introduced in the last few years, and it's interesting that Google are taking the exact opposite way of doing it to pretty much every other company. Google are trying to build a self-driving car. The other companies are trying to build a car which is slowly becoming more autonomous and can handle more of the driving.
Yeah, see, that's the way I feel it should go, because if, as you say, in these situations, say you go out down the pub, you come back, you flick it into automatic mode, it drives home. Excellent. However, there are these big holes in the autonomous car thing, particularly in that early stages, where things like the software may well be excellently designed, but there's always bugs in software. There will always be flaws and things that are introduced. As you say, aeroplanes crash very, very rarely, but when they do, there are occasionally technical errors and things when things break down.
When an aeroplane crashes, it is more likely to be a failing on multiple parts. I was actually reading a very interesting article, which I don't have a link to, I'm afraid. I will try and find it, but they were talking about how a hospital basically gave a patient 31.5 pills instead of 1 due to various problems with the computer system, what they called alarm fatigue, where people getting too many notifications of this could be an error, and so they just ignored them all. And one thing it said in particular was that they went and looked at a simulation of a cockpit, and they talked to the engineers responsible for those systems, and they've got rid of almost all errors. They've got a very strict grading system, and almost all errors don't show to the pilots, because they don't need to know that. They need to know, like, if they're going into a nosedive, they need to know about that. That's the most severe error, and I think that's the only error which has the most severe level. If they lose control of a single engine, that's one level below. That's the orange level. And so they don't get this alarm fatigue. But the other thing that they said, which is what reminded me of it, is that when something fails, when there's a plane crash, it's usually a failure on multiple instances. So multiple systems have to fail and the human has to fail.
But my point is in a car, if you're driving a car, I mean, obviously not everybody's brilliant at maintenance and stuff, but if you're driving a car, you get the feel for the car. You can feel if there's something wrong, if the engine isn't quite driving right, if there isn't quite as much power as you would, and you take it to a garage or whatever and get it inspected, sorted out. Whereas if it's this, or you're putting this trust in this computer, yes, it may pop up with a warning, this needs checking out, but because you're not the one driving it, you're not the one responsible for it, there's almost this level withdrawn. You're kind of case, oh yes, it comes up with a warning, but it's fine, I'll ignore it.
Well, why can't it take itself to the garage? You would get it to drive you to work, it goes to the garage, gets fixed, and comes back and picks you up at the end of the day.
I mean, that's in its most advanced form but as you say, I mean, these things aren't always necessarily monitored, unless they're monitoring every single component. They're not going to have sensors in every single component. The car itself isn't necessarily going to know if something's on its way out. Fair enough. As I say, I can see the counter arguments, but I think as a fully automated service, people, when you're in control of it, you tend to understand more about how it works. You tend to learn a little bit. This works like this works like this. When it's a fully automated service, you don't question it so much. You put your trust in it and you leave it running. And I believe that is the danger in autonomous cars, in that once they're autonomous, you put your entire trust in them without understanding it. And that a lack of understanding can cause significant problems. I mean, typically with computers, I'm sure most people...
We talked about this in the last episode, wasn't we? That people think they're magic and they don't really understand how things work or why things work.
And I mean, you look at the people who, the older generation specifically, who don't know so much about how computers work, the amount of times they mess something up because they don't know how it works.
Yeah.
And in these autonomous cars have to be safeguarded against these things. And I think...
Well,
I think there's a key phrase that I've heard before. There's no underestimating people's stupidity.
Yeah.
And I think when people who are designing these cars have to design for the lowest common denominator, and I think sometimes these people are almost too intelligent to think stupidly.
Google is probably able to kind of rival psychologists in their knowledge of human behaviour.
I agree to a certain extent, but they're not without their flaws.
Oh no, they're definitely not without their flaws.
And therein lies the problem. Nothing is infallible. And I know when you talk about people say about comparative safety, is that it's less likely there's going to be a software or hardware error than a human error. And I can see that argument. I agree with it to a certain extent, but it's hard to explain. But my most basic argument is, or one of my most basic arguments is blame. When it's the human, you can blame the human, and you can then say, right, it was their fault. You can prosecute them in court, and justice can be served. Whereas if it's a fault in the software, you can't claim it. You can't. Do you sue the company that created it? What happens if no one was in the vehicle at the time? Things like that.
See, I knew you was going to come up with this point because it's one that you always come up with.
It's one I always come up with. It's one of my base arguments.
It wasn't until about 1 a.m. last night that I came up with a counterpoint to that argument. So let's talk about elevators for now. It will tie in, I swear. So, the Burj, I'm probably saying this wrong, but the Burj Dubai Tower has elevators which hold 10 to 15 people, and they have to carry them upwards of up to half a kilometre, about a third of a mile. And this is a huge amount of weight to travel a huge amount of distance, and it's travelling at 9 metres per second. Now, if one of those elevators was to fail, there is no human in control of that elevator. You cannot then blame a human for that elevator failing, except you can. There is any number of people who could be responsible for. It could be the person who was supposed to maintain it, someone who manufactured it if it wasn't fit for purpose, or it could have been deliberately tampered with to introduce a fault. Maybe there was even a problem with the software designed to sort of control the motors or the latching mechanism or the safety mechanisms. There's always someone to blame, and there is generally litigation put against either a person or an organisation. Having a self-driving car, it is more complex than an elevator, but it's doing something which has the same effect on human lives, the same, almost the same impact or chance to cause harm. So it's the same sort of thing. If you are saying that you want a human to blame, then you've kind of got to say, okay, all elevators have to be pulled up by a human using a pulley system.
Yeah, I can see that, but as you say, that's on a different scale, because that is not connected to such a wide variety of devices. That is a single device working on a single system. Yes, it's hugely complicated, but as you say, it will have a specific team to service it. If your car has a fault with it, it may not go to the same garage every time. It will, especially if you're away and it's automated, it will go to the nearest garage. Now, if a part fails, do you blame it on the last person to fix that part, the last person to service it?
Well,
it's a
that
convoluted...
has nothing to do with autonomous cars. That has something to do with cars, because...
Okay, fair enough. But again, then back to the software side of it, which is the biggest difference. How do you know who wrote that specific line of code? Do you blame the person who wrote that line of code that there's a bug? Or if it's a clash between two different lines of code, do you blame the two different teams? Because...
No, you take litigation against the corporation. This is how things work in the industrial scale type thing, in commercial products. You don't sue the person on the assembly line, you sue the person. The organisation, sorry.
But anyway, we continue arguing about this point. On to the next point, which is the one I usually come out with, which is obviously Internet of Things and viruses, computer viruses. Someone maliciously causing harm to the self-driving vehicles. I mean, this is going to be appalling because I haven't got the entire story in my head, but I read recently about a thing about viruses and how bad they can be and whether they can cause real-world problems. And one of them was, there was a virus that went around many years ago that was designed to target a specific country's nuclear centrifuges.
That was the Stuxnet virus. It was created by the American Obama administration, by hackers that they...
Rumours, though, said it was.
They actually have come up with that.
Oh, okay.
I think a Snowden leak was the one that confirmed it, but it is now confirmed that it was the Obama administration who ordered that virus to be created.
But regardless, that is something designed that obviously targeted centrifuges of nuclear elements. Now, these self-driving cars will obviously need some kind of antivirus system, but antivirus systems, again, aren't infallible. There are new viruses that leak out when they find software vulnerabilities and things. These self-driving cars will be not like computers, they will be constantly connected to the internet. You won't have the ability to turn it off. Now, within 24 hours, a new virus could be created, infect every single car on the road, and create masses and masses and masses of accidents. And
well, okay, so you're saying there is someone who maliciously wants to cause harm and wants to kill masses of people on the roads.
Well, I mean, I can think of two words. The obvious stereotypical one that everyone always drops, terrorists, and secondly, anarchists.
Okay. Are you saying that these people would have no other means of causing harm to people on roads?
No, I wouldn't say no other means, but certainly it creates a vast window. I mean, as you say, it's like, just because there's other ways of destroying a submarine doesn't mean you should put a glass window in it. Do you know what I mean? That's
yeah, but
it's my point is that it creates this window. As I say, to use the same metaphor, it creates this brand new opening that suddenly becomes, as I say, it becomes very, very vulnerable. It's something that's going to have to be worked on.
Before we started internet banking, in order to get our details, someone had to be very close to us and get our details, and now it's much easier to do that. I don't see internet banking going away. And at the same time, before social networks came about, it was much harder for people to, sextortion, and things like that.
True, but internet banking is a bit different in that you have access to everyone has access to the device, the ability to access it, but they don't have access to the devices themselves, whereas driverless cars, you can access the car, you can look at the software, they will have wireless update systems that may well be able to be tampered with and things.
Yeah, but I don't think you will be able to mobilise. I mean, put it this way, Android phones have over-the-air updates, also controlled by Google, well, largely. And I haven't ever heard in the past, 10 years they've been going, something like that? I haven't heard of anyone creating an exploit which hit the over-the-air update system and affected all Android phones.
No, but there's still things like NFC hacks and things that people often do. And things like that the cars will be susceptible to things like that. They may not be susceptible to long range things, but certainly if someone plants something in a road and the cars all drive past it, think it's another car that's sending them it. Because these updates won't come all from this central server. These updates will be passed between the cars.
I don't agree. I think it will be a centralised distribution.
They've said this. They've said that a lot of it, if a car's coming down the road, it sees an accident, it will pass it on to the other cars as it drives.
Well, yeah, that's one form of update, but software updates, that's an information update, a status update, so to speak.
But
software
there are
updates
still
will come
ways
from
for each car to pass on information to another car. Now, if it's passing on faulty information...
But the car will then verify that at the same time. If its sensors disagree with what comes from another car, it's going to prioritise what its sensors see. Because it's got, in fact, I've actually got the list of sensors here, if I can find it in my notes. I actually don't see it. It is here somewhere. Here. It's got 2 cameras, one on either side. It has radar. It has a 500-foot, 360-degree LiDAR, which I believe is a form of mapping radar.
Man camera, yeah.
It has microphones to sense horns and sirens, and it has tyre sensors to give it an idea of how wide it is. And you can bet that there's going to be multiple things keeping an eye on a single element of the road. If multiple ones of those disagree with the information that comes from another car, it's going to discard the information coming from another car.
Possibly, but as I say, I think until they start... At the moment, they're in this sandbox environment which is great for testing, but very much segments it from the outside world.
Well, it's not in a sandbox environment. It's driving around San Francisco. And...
but they don't have people who have access to these things who can try and create viruses and throw them at them, if that makes sense. Until these things are popular and out there and available...
I think that's going to come a couple of years down the line. Google have always been very good at giving people the opportunity to hack their stuff. I imagine
But
before
again,
the public...
Google maybe, but Google aren't the only people working on this. Yes, okay, maybe Google do develop something really good and they do create those loopholes, but what's to stop a smaller competitor, let's say what's a budget brand car? Anybody?
Fiat?
Yeah, okay, a budget brand car manufacturer, or a small scale one who's just starting to come into the business, creates their own driverless car. Now, they're not going to put as strict regiments into place as the mainstream competitors. Yes, it will have to go through testing before they get qualified to go on the road and stuff, but unless the testing by the governing bodies is as strict as
what Google is like to do, for example.
Google likely to do, newer companies will have these loopholes. Yes, it may not affect the Google cars, which may well be the main competitors, because they may well have blocked up all loopholes and things, but newer competitors will, as they come into the scene, will have these problems introduced. It's going to become a very convoluted mess, and it's all very well saying, yes, these safeguards will be put in place, but you have to trust in the bodies regulating that these things are in place as much as you do in the fact that these things are in place in general. As much, there are multiple levels of failings that can come into place that are much less dire at the moment. Let's say a car has a problem these days. It can be, I think there was a problem with the brakes on one of the car manufacturers a couple of years ago, and they recalled a whole bunch of their lines.
Yeah, I do remember something about that.
Yeah, and that was a very serious incident. They had to recall thousands and thousands, sort of hundreds of thousands of cars because they had faulty brakes on them.
Yeah.
And you would think the brakes would go through strict testing before a car is allowed to be sold.
Now, I'm going to be a bit annoying here, and imagine if those brakes had sensors on them, and imagine if the car itself...
Brakes do have sensors on them. A lot of brakes do have sensors on them.
But imagine if the car itself was intelligent enough to realise that the brakes aren't quite working as they're supposed to. If it had this kind of data that it had gained through being an autonomous car in production.
Okay, I can see where you're going with this, do you want to continue at that point? Or
I was just going to say that the car can then report it, and these kind of issues will be picked up much earlier. In fact, they can probably even be picked up in testing.
Okay, I agree with you in that point. I agree with you entirely. Apart from the fact that are these sensors going to be put in place to monitor the efficiency of the brakes? They will be put in place to make sure the brakes are working. They will be put in place to make sure the brakes are not worn down. But they won't necessarily be testing the efficiency. If the brakes are working less efficiently, the car won't necessarily know or be able to compensate. Specifically, again, on these cheaper models. Google will have a vast array of sensors, but...
Because it likes data.
Because they love data. But the actual sensors required on these cars, the laws governing the number of sensors that are required, won't necessarily go down to that level of actual efficiency of individual components, because the sensor array will just become massive, and thus the prices will increase. And a lot of the budget models will cut out on a lot of these so-called unnecessary sensors and opt instead for, say, an annual service, which introduces a different problem of...
I think a lot of these issues are going to be solved in a very natural way, because I think autonomous cars aren't going to go from, like, in 2020 everyone has an autonomous car. I was looking at some things, and most of the manufacturers are saying this will probably add about $5,000 to the cost of a car. So it's going to be very slow on the uptake initially, because there's going to be very few people who find it valuable enough to add this onto their car. So I think it's going to be handled in a very natural way, much like initially when motorised cars came onto our roads and they started advancing. Because of the slow uptake every time there was an advance in technology, it kind of allowed the legal system to catch up a bit. And now because it's going to be worldwide instead of very select areas, it's going to allow the legal system to act on information much quicker.
I agree with that to a certain extent, but what you have to remember is when motor cars first came into place, the laws were a lot less strict, and they would probably run over someone on a back road and not necessarily tell anyone about it, and the whole legal system was far less convoluted, less bureaucratic. New laws, someone could hear about a ongoing problem and make a new law about it within a comparatively short period of time, whereas these days things have to go through so much red tape just to get implemented and things. And again, if they're finding that there's a ongoing problem with certain parts of the car and they want that part of the car monitored, they may well introduce a law that says all new automated cars have to have this part of the car monitored. But what about the ones that already exist?
Well, they get updates. That's the great thing about an autonomous car.
Physical parts. We're talking they're not gonna.
If a physical part has a fault in it which causes danger, the manufacturer has to recall it and replace it.
Yeah, but again, at what level of danger? I mean, if it's only causes danger under extreme circumstances, then they're not going to upgrade it, but it's still...
Well, it's the exact same as what happens with cars now. There are failings in cars that the manufacturers know about, and when you take your car in for a service, the garage will say, by the way, it's recommended that you pay to have this part upgraded.
Yeah, my point is that they talk about them being comparatively safer because you take out the human error, but my point is that you introduce, although you take out the human error, you introduce a whole bunch of new potential breakpoints. And until these things become more commonplace, we won't see where those breakpoints are. And I think the people who use you take out the human error argument are very, very blinded to these potential breakpoints. There hasn't been the availability to do the research at the moment as it stands. And
well, okay, in the past 5 years, because Google started testing this technology 5 years ago, in 2010, in the past 5 years, Google has driven 1 million miles, and the only accident they've encountered has happened when it was under manual control and the car got rear-ended. And they are constantly expanding where they're testing, the environments that they're testing in, the conditions that they're testing in. There is 4 or 5 spots in the UK which is about to be opened up for autonomous car testing by Google.
But again, as we say, the law has to be very adaptable. I mean, the UK has got, as you say, these things need to be strictly regulated and stuff to a certain extent to provide safety, whereas the UK has gone for innovation, which is great in certain respects, but also potentially dangerous, in that they've basically turned around and said, we will introduce laws as a reactive thing when we discover what the problems are. As it stands, they're opening it up to pretty much do what you want with them.
That's not quite it. What the UK have said is that if the car can pass a driving test, then you are allowed to test it with a stunt driver or controlled driver behind the controls to it.
It's not a stunt driver, it's a qualified driver.
A qualified driver, but it's the same thing that's happening in Nevada, in Los Angeles, in New York, and all the other places that allow driverless cars.
I don't know, as I was hearing, it's much more open, it's much more... It's great. The UK is much less restricted in terms, and therefore opens himself to innovation. The way I heard it, it was intentionally done to try and draw the market to this part. It was intentionally done, Slacker, to try and draw the market in as a business model.
Yeah.
Because they want people to invest in the businesses in the UK, which is great in terms of business plan. But again, it's that greedy side of things. Is the best business plan, the best innovation, the most safest thing to do?
Well, I did read that article, and it's just a single line that you've got to look out for, and it did say that one of the conditions is there's a controlled driver. So at the moment, the UK hasn't legalised fully autonomous vehicles.
Well, yeah, but as I say, not fully autonomous, but at the end of the day, yes, you have a controlled driver behind the wheel, but if that driver is, it's the control thing we were talking about earlier, the putting too much reliance in it. If that driver is behind the wheel, but they're trusting entirely in the automated systems, they may well not be looking at the road as vigilantly as they should be.
Well, at the moment, the driver in control of the car is still fully liabililess, I believe, for the car. So any company that wished to do testing, because it's only companies doing this at the moment, you don't have any hobbyists building this kind of technology, but any company willing to do testing, they will make sure that the person behind the wheel was paying full attention. It's in their best interest to do that.
Yeah. As I say, I like the idea of driverless cars, and I think in their final stages they will be great, but I think it's a very, very dangerous period, and I don't think there's this great leap in technology that people think, oh, they're amazing, they can do this, they can do that. I think there's a lot of dangerous pitfalls along the way that will only become apparent as time goes on. And I think, as I say, there's no accounting for the real world, the situations. I mean, to quote another common phrase, no plan ever survives contact with no military plan ever survives contact with the enemy. And I think this applies strongly to driverless vehicles. Yes, they are testing them on the roads and things, but they're still in testing stage. And as soon as they start chucking them into consumers' hands and getting people to drive around,
they're not planning to chuck them into consumers' hands.
No. I don't mean
5 years of slow, careful, planned testing.
But it's still planning, testing. As once they start selling them on the market and taking them out of the control of these trained testers, as soon as they start putting in regular civilians, so to speak, you're going to encounter situations they didn't plan for. And as I said earlier, there is a danger of being too intelligent. You don't always take into account some of the simplest problems. And
Google have actually said that they're building these cars from the ground up with safety in mind at every single aspect. By all accounts, the reason they wanted to build autonomous cars was to make roads safer. So these Google cars, particularly, I don't know about the other brands, but the Google cars, they are overcautious at some points. And I think one of the comments made when the Google car took its Nevada driving test was that it was too cautious approaching and pulling away from junctions. And one thing that Google have done with it is they found out that at stoplights, most accidents happen within 2 seconds of the lights changing. So the Google car will hold back for 1.5 seconds to reduce the amount of time where it's potential for an accident to happen away from the lights.
Here's the other thing, is I've always said that, my driving instructor used to say there's the types of people who see lots of accidents but are never in them. And I think the driverless cars are potentially that sort of dangerous, like the old granny who drives 5 miles an hour under the speed limit everywhere. Now, yes, they may not be doing anything wrong, but you get someone a bit agitated come up behind them, and they're driving 5 miles an hour under the speed limit, who's maybe in a rush, maybe, I don't know, a little bit sort of stressed out or whatever, and they can make bad decisions based on the fact that this person is going extra cautious.
Well, when I drive at night,
yes, that would be the driver behind's fault, but
that's all the more reason why that driver should have an autonomous car.
Well,
but okay,
no, because as we say, you can't force driverless cars upon people, and there will always be people who drive manually.
I was joking about that, but let's look at it seriously. When I drive at night, if there isn't sufficient lighting or I'm not familiar with the road, I will drive 10 miles an hour under the speed limit, and there will be people who are comfortable and they do know the roads, and they will be pressing me behind. Now, if they caused an accident, that would be absolutely their fault. There is no reason why I shouldn't be driving 10 miles an hour if I believe that's a safe speed for me. And at the same time, if the Google car believes that driving slightly slower than the speed limit is safe for it, or driving super cautiously is safe for it, then as long as it's within the UK, or as long as it's able to pass a driving test, I believe that the car is perfectly fine to handle those situations. And don't forget, I'm not sure about the American driving test, but in the UK, you can fail for being too cautious, to
Indeed,
holding back too much.
I failed my first driving test for, well, two things. One was being too cautious. The second one was cutting around apparently too sharply. But that's beside the point.
Kind of a mixture.
Yeah, a mixture. but yeah, as I say, so I know it happens, and but as I said, my point is that you don't drive masses, so you maybe don't see this a lot. But I've driven a considerable amount in the past. Oh, God knows how many years that I've been driving now. Probably nearing 8 or 9, maybe.
Yeah,
more.
something like that.
Maybe as many as I think I got 8 years.
About...
8 years no claims, so 8 years past.
Yeah,
I've got because my insurance is due soon. 8 years past, and then obviously learning before that, and I've seen a lot of accidents caused by these type of people. And as I say, yes, technically they weren't doing anything wrong, technically, but overcautiousness can be very dangerous. And as you say, these situations where maybe for a second and a half these driverless cars are moving, the person behind might think, oh, it's broken down. They might not necessarily realise it's a driverless car or something, or might think, oh, they've broken down, oh, they're not going, I'll go around them.
Well, it generally takes a second to a second and a half for a human driver to pull away from the stoplight. Like, the reactions aren't that quick.
Okay, but, well, they can't be that, it can't be a second and a half, because otherwise they wouldn't have been considered too cautious in the driving test in, where did you say it was, California?
Nevada.
So,
well, it was other stuff.
It must have been noticeably slower.
It was other things as well. It was approaching junctions, distance behind a cyclist, and things like that.
But this is sort of the things that I'm talking about. Is that yes, they may well be being extra cautious, erring on the side of safety, which is great for the driverless car, but may well cause unforeseen problems in other situations that wouldn't be a problem for two regular drivers, if that makes sense. And while technically you can't blame the driverless car for that, you can't also deny its effect on the situation.
Essentially, what you're saying is that by removing human error from one car, you increase the human error for another car.
Yeah. Almost. That's perhaps a good way of putting it. As you say, you increase the maybe stress on another driver and increase the potential for human error, which otherwise would not have been there. So these sorts of situations would have to be analysed, and until they're out on the roads, people won't know.
They are out on the roads. You keep saying until they're out on the roads.
They are on the roads, but they're not until they're commonplace. Then maybe I'm using the wrong phrase. Until they're commonplace, you won't get these sorts of data. You won't. Well, this sort of the big data we were talking about before. The whole point where until these things are maybe 1 in every 20 cars, for example, something like that, when they're regularly around, then if you might see a massive increase in, say, accidents at junctions because people were overtaking the driverless car, which was pulling away slowly because it couldn't see round the corner properly.
It can see round corners. It can see through objects.
I'm using maybe too specific an example, but do you understand where I'm coming from?
You're looking at the Google car as if it's a human driver with a few automated things. It has a lot more vision and a lot more knowledge about the environment than the human driver behind it.
Okay, maybe I'm not explaining myself well, but do you understand where I'm coming from with this point? The whole sort of...
I do, but I don't think...
sort of third-party induced error.
I don't think we should continue to have 1.2 million deaths on the road because people got impatient sitting behind the Google car. I don't think more human error is a reason to reduce human error.
No, I can agree with that, but I also agree the end doesn't justify the means, so to speak. That's maybe a bad choice of phrase, but what I mean is I don't believe we should necessarily say, oh, this is better than this. It's the whole do we kill this many small number of people so that this many people can survive? Do you know what I mean? It's the whole, many of the most despicable things in the world, in history, have been done with the best of intentions. It's the whole, we can't just analyse things on a statistical point of view. I mean, the film I, Robot, the whole, the scene where he's like, the flashback scene where he's like, oh yeah, the robot analysed it and he said that this person had the chance to...
there was a 7% extra chance that I would live, and a human would have known that 7% is worth it.
And, as I say, these sorts of arguments hold true also for driverless cars to a certain extent. The whole... They may well analyse it and say, right, if I hit... I've got two non-driverless cars driving at me, I've got no escape. If I hit this car instead of this car, I've got a better chance of getting out of it in one piece. And it's a case of, yes...
yeah, but if a human was in the same situation, he would probably hit both cars and cause extra death.
So okay, I'm pulling examples out of my head, and I don't always...
Any example you come up with...
I don't always... provide my point of view well with my examples. I try and example it to explain it, and I don't always do well. But
any way you spin it, there is more individual people dying without autonomous cars than there will be with them.
But again, you can't just look at the statistics. You have to look at the situation sometimes, and I think these things will be hard to see to begin with. I say. That's basically my sort of overall point. Back to what I said earlier, is that these things. I like the idea of driverless cars in their final form when they're really safe and great and excellent. But I think in their early stages, they're almost being pushed forwards at a very, very fast rate.
I don't think so. I mean, they've covered 1 million miles in the last 5 years, and they are expanding their testing areas, the cities that they're testing in, and so on. I fully suspect in the next 5 years they'll have hit 5 million miles on the road. I mean, I heard a little while ago that they've got their combined 40 years experience between all of the autonomous cars. And I read in an interview that the Google engineers, every single time they take the car out of their facility, they learn something new and they adapt the way that the car handles. And if you just imagine all of this data coming in over the next 5 years, by the time they're hoping to make it public, they're going to have experienced an awful number of these situations that you don't think they're going to experience until they're very, very commonplace.
Maybe, but I do fear that there's too much trust put in these things, too much of this sort of, as you say, this whole idea of, they're experiencing new situations all the time, by the time it comes out, they'll be fine. And I think it's too, as I say, it boils down very much to the trust issue, the whole too much trust in the machines. Call me a skeptic, call me a...
I mean... I was talking about aeroplanes earlier, and the truth is, an awful lot of those aeroplanes fly without pilot interaction. There is regularly, the pilot is encouraged to take over the controls to keep them alert and to keep them on top of the aeroplane, which may be something which you introduce into autonomous cars at some point. But the truth is, if you fly from the UK to America, a large portion of that journey is done autonomously, and you are putting your faith in those autonomous systems. And as we said earlier, it's currently much more likely to die as a result of a motor vehicle than it is an aeroplane. And it could well be that part of that is purely because there is much less human error, because it's much harder to get a pilot's license, and because once you do get a pilot's license, the computer is doing a lot of the work, and they've been doing this for many, many years, and they've been making it very, very safe.
As I say, we shall have to wait and see, but I think that there will be a lot of people who will never buy an fully autonomous car. I will never buy a fully autonomous car, I can tell you that now. May buy an assisted or a one that has something like a switchover, so that you can, as I say, use it as almost a far advanced version of what currently is cruise control.
Well, there's
or
that's
cruise
probably
control combined with sat nav, but
that's probably exactly what you're going to get. I mean, these current Google cars, they've got a big button on the dashboard to stop the car. They've got a very accessible switch to put it into manual or automatic mode, and that will probably come in and stay in the consumer models. I mean,
that sort of thing I'm perfectly happy with, but I will never trust the car entirely.
you want a steering wheel in front of you, basically.
I want to have the ability to control it, even if I waive that ability. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, that makes perfect sense. It's an issue of control, basically, or a perception of control.
I want to have the perception. I want to have the option to control it, even if I never use it.
One thing that I'm slightly worried about, I fully accept and I agree that there should be that option for humans to take over at any point or just decide that they want to go for a drive, because I actually really enjoy driving. I don't do much of it, but I enjoy it when I get out on a sunny day. But if a human sees a potential for an accident ahead and they take control, if they then make a bad decision that the car wouldn't have made, is that a good thing that you allowed them that control?
Yeah, I mean...
Because, I mean, there's a... I accept your point of putting too much faith in the car, but we also put too much faith in the human. If the human is so likely to make an error and the car is so unlikely to make an error, then you've got to kind of... I know I'm looking at this analytically again, but you've kind of got to weigh up the chance that each one will make a bad decision, and at this point it's looking like the car is going to make the better decision. I've got a couple of examples here. In 2012, during the Las Vegas driving test, a pedestrian stepped out into the road suddenly. The car handled that just fine. A cyclist swerved in front and it handled that absolutely perfectly, with, of course, much better reactions than a human would be able to. And there's a Telegraph reporter who went to America to see it, and they gave an anecdote where there's watching another car turn around a right-hand bend, and they almost hit a jogger that they didn't see. And the people in the car, like there was 4 people in the car, and all of them were too busy watching this potential accident. They didn't notice that there was a jogger right in front of them that, had they been in control, they would have had to take action against. And the car, of course, it's not interested in that accident over there, so it did see the second jogger, and it did take action accordingly.
Yeah, but again, subject to the argument of it makes people more likely to do stupid things, going out of the car situation then, because this is perhaps a good opportunity to do so, you and me both know that in the senior school we went to, I don't know what's the equivalent of in America, is it high school in America?
I don't know. I mean,
I don't know. But
secondary
anyway,
school.
Secondary school, which is
It's 11 to 18.
11 to 18, yeah. So in that time period we went to the school, outside the road in front, the kids very much all had the attitude of, if their car doesn't want to kill me and get in trouble with the law, they won't hit me, and just walk right out in front. Now, yes, they had that example, but in a world of driverless cars, if you know that the cars can't hit you because they're driverless and they have these automated systems, what's to stop you just walking across the road wherever you feel like? Because you know it's not dangerous.
There's no limits to human idiocy. There are people who walk blindly out into the road nowadays.
My point is yes, there's no. There are people who do it now, but people are reserved now because it's dangerous. Now, yes, as I say, it may be less dangerous to do so, but it's going to cause problems in many ways. As I say, cyclists, for example, cyclists who now really cautious, stay on the side of the roads and stuff because they know it's dangerous to go in the roads, they may well cycle out right in front of these driverless cars. Now, sometimes, what if they cut it too sharply to a point when even the driverless cars can't avoid it, because there just isn't the time?
There will always be human idiocy, and there will always be human impotence, and...
But again, it's this point of, yes, there will, but it's increased. The chance of it are increased. The chance of these people doing these things
Well, then maybe the Darwin Award will have a few new candidates. I'm not saying that these people deserve to die, but if you're cycling and you cut in front of a car... if you're cycling and you cut in front of a car because you assume it will stop, no matter who's in control of the car, because you don't know it's actually in autonomous mode. You don't know that the driver didn't just decide to go for a Sunday drive. And even if there's a point where all cars are autonomous, if you cut out in front of a car assuming it'll stop, that's an idiotic thing to do, and you're putting your own life in danger. And in fact, you're putting the lives of the people in the car in danger.
You are, but as I say, the point is that these things may well become a problem.
If it becomes a problem, then the government will start legislating that a cyclist cannot cut in front of a car and assume it'll stop. They will actually legislate that. They will legislate against stupidity because that's what they do. That's their job.
Yes, and we both know how effective they are at that, excuse my cynicism.
But here's the thing. If it's illegal to kind of swerve in front of a car assuming it'll stop, when someone does, they've just committed a crime, and the consequences are firmly on them. And that's the way it should be. They did something stupid, they should pay the consequences.
It is, but what's going to happen? Is the driverless car going to see this and report it to the police? In which case, are we looking at a sort of very much Big Brother type situation? Or are we looking at... I don't think people will happily concede
what happens
to
if
those
cyclists
things.
does it these days? A accident will happen, the police will be informed, and it will get analysed and solved and brought to court. Driverless cars don't change all that much in terms of actual road usage.
I don't know. I believe it's a great naivety to think that they won't change that much. I think they will change masses, and I think some for the better and some for the worse. I think
it depends what timescale you're looking at. Like you said,
as I say, I think these sorts of problems where, as I say, people walking out in front of traffic because they're assuming that all the cars will stop. Yes, it's their own stupidity, but I think these things won't be a problem now and won't be foreseen by the people creating these driverless cars. But
I don't think it's going to be that big of a problem. I don't think there are that many idiots in the country. There are a very large number, but
I'm
I don't
talking
think
extreme examples, but that's example of these types of unforeseen consequences.
You're talking a point where we have reached saturation, where there is more than 99% driverless cars on the roads, and a point where it will most likely be there will be particular roads where you cannot physically take manual control. This is going to happen in 50 to 100 years' time. Well, actually, 50 to 100 years after the technology.
This is one of the reasons we get so enthusiastic about this debate, is that we both talk the extreme examples and we both try and sort of talk about the as it develops technology. But as I say, my extreme examples, again, are when they're this much percentage. Your extreme examples are, oh, well, until these people should just be driving driverless cars then because they're not doing very well. Things like that. As I say, it's very hard to contemplate the emerging technology.
Yeah, but the absolute best thing about emerging technology is it emerges very slowly. These issues will crop up at 1 or 2 a year, and people will have time to react to them.
I hope they do. I really do.
It's not...
That is a lot
You are not the only person who does not trust this technology. There are going to be very few people going out on day one buying it. Not just because of the cost, but because they can't perceive that it's going to be a benefit. This will happen slowly enough that we will be able to see any issues a long way down the road. I can guarantee you that. I will bet enough money I will bet you enough money right now to buy one of these cars. I will bet enough money that these problems will not have a major impact on road safety or consumer safety.
Don't know. I think it's too early to say one way or the other, so I wouldn't take the bet, not because I wasn't confident in it, but because I would say it's too early to predict the outcome, if that makes sense.
Yeah. But we seem to have come to a sort of natural conclusion, and it's just
about the right time.
It's
so
about
that's
the right time.
Convenient.
It's coming up to the hour.
I'm sure we probably have hundreds of more things, if not thousands more things we could say on the topic, but
I think we'll just end up repeating ourselves because we've kind of run out of information. One thing I didn't say was the current failings of the Google car, which I will run over very quickly. Things which have to be solved in the next 5 years. They are currently very poor at reversing and parallel parking, much like their human counterparts. they currently...
Which is surprising considering the parallel parking thing. A lot of these non-autonomous cars are claiming to be able to do already.
It's kind of... But I think it doesn't handle it well because they haven't been focusing on it, because that technology is reasonably easy to implement. They want the fancy stuff, the headline-grabbing stuff.
Yeah.
Google Car parks itself just like the luxury car you bought. Doesn't quite grab the same headlines. They currently can't respond to sirens, which is a major thing that they do need to work on.
Indeed.
They're not good
Again, they will need to distinguish emergency vehicle sirens as separate from, say, the sirens of a fire alarm in a nearby building.
Yeah, that should be fairly easy to do because there's very particular pitches and tones in each area. They aren't very good in very advanced weather conditions such as heavy snow, heavy fog, heavy rain. Basically, things that humans are advised not to drive in. They're not very good in there, and they need to improve that massively in the next 5 years. And there's still debates as to insurance liability, as you were saying, who is actually to blame if one of these things causes an accident.
I think that will be one of the biggest things to begin with initially.
That's actually the conclusion that the article I was reading came to, that this is going to be the biggest hurdle because it's a very human issue rather than a technological issue. So,
and again, different countries will implement different laws. In a certain situation, maybe the driver's owner of the vehicle's fault in one country, or might be the owner of the the car company's fault in another, and be the fault of a software program or something, or the service engineer in another country. And
well, that's not too surprising because every country has its own road laws already, and everyone has different liabilities. If you go to Egypt, it's basically biggest vehicle wins. If you are driving a bigger vehicle, if you can cause a massive amount of damage, you have right of way. No question about it. And that system actually works amazingly well once you stop being terrified that the big truck's about to cut you off. But, yeah, those are some of the issues, and I'm sure that the very smart people at Google will find some way to resolve them in the next few years. Other than that, though, thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Until next time, don't feed the trolls.